So, if you've been following my channel for a little bit, you know that one of our major trends that we are seeing for 2021 is prop tech and innovation and creativity in commercial real estate. So, today I figured it would be appropriate to have David Stoller on with me. David has been working in prop tech for years. He was with Siemens for quite a bit. He's with Brainbox AI now, which is doing some pretty fascinating things in the prop tech sector. So, David, what's going on, man?
Not much, working from home like a lot of people right now. But I'm really thrilled to be here. Thanks for the invite, and I'm looking forward to nerding out with you about prop tech and development and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny. David and I had a conversation about this last week, and we kind of set a like an hour timeline for ourselves to have this conversation. And we got to an hour, and we were like, "Man, we feel like we just blinked. We could sit here and talk about all of these nerdy things about commercial real estate for hours." So that's why we decided to do this, which I'm really excited about, man. And so talk to us a little bit. I mean, one thing that I didn't mention, obviously, you are the co-chairman for the Innovation Council at the Urban Land Institute, which is how you and I really got to know each other well. Will you give everybody a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, certainly. Like a lot of people, I didn't, I didn't come into this, right out of school. It was quite a bit of a journey. But for most of my career, I've kind of pinged in between energy and technology and kind of the confluence of all those things. I started off as a consultant for a large corporation, working internally after college. Did that for several years, moved into the energy sector, and then built out a couple companies and a couple divisions within larger organizations. And most recently, I was the director of strategy and development at Siemens for their IoT group. And I'm currently with a company called Brainbox AI. We're an artificial intelligence for commercial real estate company.
That's awesome. So we haven't dived too far into your IoT position with Siemens. Can you talk a little bit about what you were doing with the Internet of Things?
Yeah, absolutely. So that role was kind of born out of a couple key acquisitions that Siemens had made. So for those of you who aren't too familiar with Siemens as an organization. First of all, it's a massive multinational conglomerate with a lot of different divisions. But one of them is their building technologies group, now called Smart Infrastructure. And within the Smart Infrastructure group, they have building automation, control, fire, security, life safety, air ventilation for specialty laboratories. And in order to kind of round out and kind of move their offering into the new generation of technologies in the built space, they made a couple acquisitions. One was a company called Enlighted, and one was a company called Comfy, and then another one called J2 Industries. Most of my time was focused around the Enlighted offering. I work closely with some of the people over at the with some of the experiential app teams. So the IoT offering, as it pertains to Siemens, is a little bit different, but fundamentally IoT stands for the Internet of Things. And it's simply the process of creating sensors and data backhaul for all forms of the built environment so that you can create new inferences, new actionable insights, or even new applications for consumers. And so what we were really working towards at the time was how do commercial real estate owners and operators get a better insight into their asset. And that was really what Enlighted was looking for, right? Enlighted is high density, high granularity data occupancy that you can then run through a series of analytics to create a whole set of inferences, whether it's utilization, right? Because densification was the big key word for a long time. Now with COVID, it's a little bit different. But there's other inferences you can derive in how people work with each other, how people use the space, so that you can, as a building owner, can better redeploy or reconceptualize spaces for clients to deliver more value to your customers at the end of the day. So that was really what we were working on within that confines. And then simultaneously, I was working closely with developers to help kind of conceptualize what a smart building could look like, and then ensure that delivery through the construction process. And so, you, Tyler, probably are aware as anybody that the construction process as it stands today isn't ideal. I don't think anybody's exactly happy with how it works, but just due to the historical and legacy organizations that we have and the way that we organize around each other for these developments, sometimes we don't deliver the best solutions to the end user, and it's just due to conflicting conflicting interests at different levels of that development. And so my job was to kind of help smooth that transition from concept all the way through to delivery.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, if you look at construction, a lot of it largely hasn't changed for decades. I mean, which is kind of wild to think about, right? You think about, in the last 30 years, computers have taken over the world. And for the most part, yeah, we've talked about 3D printing homes and we've talked about computers building homes and stuff like that, but it's still not really mainstream and it's not happening all that much. I mean, why do you think that is? Why do you think that construction's been so slow to adapt?
Well, I think there's a couple different reasons. One is the way that construction unfurls, right? So if you look at the different stages from development, there's a whole world centered around raising capital in order to do this. You have architects who are concerned about the design and the deliverable. You have general contractors who are concerned about, obviously safety and things like that. But fundamentally, they're concerned about getting on a job and off a job in as timely a manner as possible, just due to the way that their cash flow operates. And then more specifically, doing that job under budget. And so you have that creates conflict in the way that a project is delivered. And specifically because historically and then within our organizations, we've always had the requirement for specialties, right? And I think we see this across all industries, though. There used to be, if you work in a manufacturing plant, there used to be a guy maybe who specialized in one particular motor management, right? If you go to a bookstore, there used to be a person who knew a lot about one specific genre, or there was bookstores, right? But yeah. There was highly specialized professionals that focused around one very big thing, because particularly in the built environment, it's such a big comprehensive solution. So you had to have mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural, landscape. And for a developer and for a user, those are fundamentally one thing. And for the delivery process, it's a bunch of different things. And so you create a series of silos that just, don't talk to each other the way they should, and they say they talk to each other, but, we know that really they don't talk to each other to the degree that they should. And so you end up with disjointed systems, or you end up with disjointed deliverables that, while may match the specification requirements, don't match the intent of the original design. And that's a problem. And that goes back to how a lot of manufacturers go to market with their channel partners and manufacturer specification requirements, and the way that people spec lock products and things like that in order to control a total package. So there's a lot of just different things. And it's not just the construction industry. When you start to look into the acquisition and the distribution models, there's a lot of issues in the way that those little tendrils spin off too. And so that's why it's important and that was part of the reason we felt what we were doing so valuable. I think our clients agreed, is that we were able to kind of navigate that whole piece of the economy, not just from the developer's requirements, but all the way through to when the consumer acquired it, and then how we acquired materials and from who, and making sure that they were the right things for what we were trying to do.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some stuff going on behind the scenes, but it would be interesting to see, how blockchain could impact construction, because it seems to me, I mean, it really, you're absolutely right. It's all these individual silos. I mean, you've got your contract, you've got the developer, then the architect, then the engineer, then, your landscape architect, and, then you have your contractor, and then the contractor has all these subcontractors underneath them. And so how can you make that entire process talk to each other at the same time? Because I would imagine if you could figure that out, it would make the entire process not only far more efficient, but far faster.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm inclined to agree with you. I think that the obstacle there is that is kind of more inertia, right? People do business the way that they've kind of always done business, right? Like, and that because they're afraid of trying new things. Like, innovation can often be a scary word, right? And so that's part of the thing that we work on at the Innovation Action Council, is to try to identify ways to make innovation more palatable for people or packaged in a way that makes it easy for our members. Because if you have something that works and it works and it's always worked, why would you change it, right? The reality is, it may work for you in the small piece of what you're delivering on, but in the holistic deliverable, it doesn't actually deliver as much value that you need, right? So it's hard to get people to see or make the changes internally. So I think that blockchain, and I know that there's a lot of other kind of cryptos that are focusing on, like a buddy of mine's been talking a lot about Chainlink, which is really is a crypto that's specifically tied to different contracts. I think that there's a lot of opportunity, but the obstacle there is getting all the people on board. And then from a and then kind of a monetization strategy around that, right? So if you're a developer, I think the stipulation is that it leads with you, right? I'm doing this project, and in order to ensure the warranty of my products and the fidelity of my vision, I want to have a framework to deliver this project, and anyone who wants to participate has to be on this platform. I think that's how you can deliver that, right? I don't think general contractors are going to opt into it. I definitely don't think distribution partners are interested in doing that, or manufacturers. I think it needs to be driven from the developer side of things. If that change is going to be made, fundamentally, everyone answers back to them.
Yeah, it's so true, because I mean the developer's the orchestrator, right? They're the ones that are controlling the whole show. So it really comes from the top down to make that decision. You've got to conscientiously make the choice that, hey, technology, the Internet of Things, having these hyper modernized buildings is important to me. Let's figure out how to make that happen.
Absolutely, and that's something that I always, when I was with Siemens when we first got started, we initially were trying to leverage our existing channel. And we were going to engineers and general contractors, and you'd hear some are really progressive, right? Some are really in it and they understand, they're bought in and they're doing it. There's other ones that just fundamentally don't see value in doing this because their customers don't directly ask them for it. And that's a failure not of them, it's a failure of maybe it's a failure of the developer for not looking to the future, right? There's a lot of developers out there that look at these assets as just numbers on a spreadsheet, and the reality is buildings are more than that, right? They're places where we live, they're places we learn, they're places that we work. We spend the majority of our lives in the built environment, and so in order to get, I think the thought process needs to shift at the developer level in some cases for this stuff to happen, in order to drive it down through the channel, right? So whenever a developer goes, oh yeah, they're looking at the cap rate, they're looking at all their financing, they're figuring, if we could do this and rent it this is a good deal, I'm pulling the trigger. And then they kind of walk away and they just monitor it on the Excel sheet. And I think that, that's fine, right? Because sometimes these are, people, but I just don't like the idea of treating buildings like bonds, So.
Yeah. Well, hey, if you are joining us live, feel free to leave us questions in the live chat, and Dave and I will get to those as we can. So, David, that's a pretty good segue right there. So, how do you think that proptech is going to have, or I guess, where do you think proptech will have a bigger impact on our current infrastructure or on new construction?
Oh man, so it depends on the type of proptech. When people talk about proptech, that includes a lot of, big kind of institutional players too that we all know, but we just don't think of all of the enterprise asset management players. I think that I think there's new versions of that. When I think about technology, I think of it in a couple different ways. Maybe that'll help. I think of the first generation, the first in kind of digital revolution was simply the replication of hard copy in digital format, right? So these are fundamentally papers that are being put to a computer that we can access and easily transfer or mark off. And that's what a lot of the traditional software solutions or a lot of the traditional technology solutions is simply taking a file cabinet and putting it on a computer, or taking a paper moving machine and putting it on it, right? And so I think the next iteration is taking that really comprehensive paper component of your business and then looking towards the digitization of your physical assets. And that's the next generation. That's where the IoT component comes in. And then we're leveraging that data, and we're applying analytics, which is even deeper. We're starting to apply AI. And we can apply, and I think there's going to be a lot of different players across all of those groups that are touching on stuff. So that being said, I think in new construction, that middle component, that IoT, that really dense, integrated, and accessible data, it's going to be on new construction. I think it's really it can be cost prohibitive sometimes. In existing assets, there are solutions that you can deploy that make a lot of sense and that can start doing it. But fundamentally, I think what we're all trying to achieve is, how do we get as much data out of these assets in order to optimize them as much as possible and save as much money and deliver as much value to our clients, right? So there are solutions like that asset management software or enterprise resource planning software that can deliver value on existing properties, right? AI can deliver value on existing properties, provided you have that data. But I think that the ones that are going to generate the most value are the ones that have the best data infrastructure and have the best capability of capturing that information that they can then use. And does
Yeah,
that kind
man.
of answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, look, it makes sense, right? I mean, if you're building a building from the ground up, you're obviously going to have more touch points, and it's far easier to just go ahead and install the technology than it is to go back and retrofit a solid concrete building and have to, run wiring or plumbing or something else through all of that. I mean, it's a pain.
Yeah, and I think
So
a lot of times you look at asset class life cycle, right? Like sometimes people are going like, well, do I want to invest in this? Do I want to, how much more could I conceivably get out of this asset class? Because, maybe I put in sensors or whatever cool thing. It's fundamentally still like a 45-year-old building with indoor decor from the 70s, right? Like
right,
when you think about what's going to deliver, you know, technology is from a business perspective, it like I said, it has to start kind of at the top. You need to have somebody who's bought into the vision and the concept from the beginning and at the top to drive it through, because it doesn't. There's a lot of people who aren't going to just naturally do it. They're going to wait, and that's just. I mean, even today, right? Like when you talk about like digital transformation, we've undergone a massive one in our society in the last year. COVID was the one of the largest drivers. Right? I mean, everyone's working from home, like myself included, right? We're using teleconferencing to a degree we've never done before. There are certain aspects of the way that businesses have always operated that would not change, despite these products all being here, all being affordable, all being viable. It took some external cause that forced them, and that's because a lot of the leadership was not interested in necessarily pushing it on their own. That being said, we were working with some clients who during COVID were already prepared, right? They had a smart building. They were integrated. They'd started undergoing their digital transformation as an organization. And when COVID happened, that process to switch over was quick, right? Like Siemens, we had done it. And when COVID hit while I was there, we moved 375,000 employees to remote like overnight. It was
wow,
right. Like that's a huge feat. But all of the work, all of the pain and suffering of that digital transformation had happened years earlier. Right? So we were able to do that. And I think that fundamentally gets to what the value of this stuff is not necessarily, oh, do we have tech just to be shiny or do we have it? It's being bought into the concept, enabling yourself to be able to do it, but then also understanding it gives you flexibility, it gives you resiliency as an organization. And that's important. And I think that gets at a whole nother aspect of the world that we're talking about when it comes to investors bringing money into the real estate system. I think Blackstone just announced that they're prioritizing ESG rated bonds and investments over everything, right? They're making those are the defaults going forward for all their 401k packages, their Roth packages. And so if you're an organization who relies on lenders to finance your projects, you're going to need to have this kind of stuff. You're going to need to think about this ahead of time, because otherwise you're not going to be able to raise funds in the way that you used to be able to. Because I mean, Blackstone is whatever 7% of global GDP or something like that. They're huge, right?
they're pretty big. They're pretty big. That's wild when you put that in perspective with 375,000 employees. I mean, the majority of companies that we work with are sub 50. And so it's relative. I mean, compared to 375,000 people, that's very easy to pivot when you have 50 employees or fewer. Can't even imagine what would have happened to a company at the start of this pandemic had they not been preparing for that.
Right. And think about how many people, I mean, I think we're seeing the results of it. There's a lot of organizations that aren't here now or are suffering to a degree or scaled down to a degree that they're not as effective as they were. Now, it's unfortunate, right? And that's not to say that like if they had appropriately invested in property tech for their board, they would be here today. But I don't think that's necessarily the truth. But I think it underlines a larger mindset around being innovative in the way you do your business, right? And just because things have worked, I don't think that's going to be a good excuse going forward. Kind of illustrated by the investment world taking notice and making these kind of activist, I guess they would call them activists. I would say that they're just better investment practices these days. But I think that as an organization, if you're thinking about innovation, if you're thinking about resiliency, if you're thinking about sustainability, if you're thinking about the future multi-use capabilities that you're building and how you can enable that, that's reflective of a company that is thinking about long-term potential opportunities and is not being short-sighted in the way that they do business. And I think that that's important, and I think that's important to investors. And I think that, and when Blackstone mentioned that, they said the reason they're making this important is because if you're not considering carbon or environmental impacts as a potential detriment or to the business and how you contribute or how you're mitigating, it's illustrative of poor planning as an organization, and therefore we are less inclined to invest in you. And that's the logic behind it, right? And it's like, it's very clear, it makes sense. I think we just need to figure out a framework or a way, or a way to kind of communicate that to some of the more staunch, slow to grow commercial real estate players, right?
When you break it down like that, I mean, it's a no-brainer. For Blackstone to say, no, if you're overlooking the environment, we're not going to invest in you because clearly you're missing the boat. I mean, that's brilliant. I actually never thought about environmental. Basically using a company's environmental inclination, whether it's positive or negative, as a determining factor of whether they're a viable company.
To be perfectly clear, they're still investing in the old stuff, right? Like it's still,
Sure.
they still, invest in bombs and oil and tobacco and all the other stuff.
Hey,
But
I'm
when it
sure
comes
there's environmentally conscious bombs out there.
yeah, sprinkle seeds.
That's right.
Uh, but I think it shows that they have a firm understanding that like changes are inevitable, right? Either they're quick like COVID, or they're slow like raising sea tides, or they're coming into play and they're disrupting people's businesses, right? When you talk, I lived in Louisiana for a long time, and the environmental impacts down there are abundantly clear, right? We had the BP oil spill. We've got deep. We've got pollution in the Gulf. We've got a dead zone. We've got rising temperatures from global warming, which is increasing more hurricanes. Like there's just this inevitable deluge of things that happen because of that. And so the businesses that operate there have to adjust. And if they don't adjust, they're not going to exist because there's going to be the flora and fauna change. And so when someone like that says, when an organization like them says, we are changing we're looking to our investment criteria is going to start to consider how you not necessarily even contribute, but how you plan around it, right? So, and if you understand that the future of global warming or these negative environmental or social unrest like impact you, what are you doing to mitigate them so that it doesn't impact you in a negative way? And then how are you also planning to be prepared for them if and when some of them inevitably do occur? And that's, if you're not thinking in that way, you're not actually thinking about how to make your business successful in the long term. And that's what investing is, right? Like they want to invest in the long-term successful businesses and to generate returns.
Yeah, I love that mentality because change starts locally, right? And so if a company that's that large is saying, look, one of the first things that we're starting to look at is environmental and how you're taking that into consideration, that's how things start to change, which is pretty exciting to see. Let's break the innovation and technology down to a more granular level. What are a few examples of implemented technology within building systems that you're seeing today that we didn't have 5 years ago?
I think obviously IoT is really a really robust new set of solutions. I think that there's indoor air quality is something that a lot of people haven't given a lot of time to, which I think they're starting to, obviously besides COVID, but there's an immense amount of data that indicate that indoor, like highly recycled indoor air is problematic in your ability to function. Like having too much carbon in the air can make you lethargic, make you lazy. Like, there was a lot, I'm going to paraphrase, but there was a study I had seen where they basically were saying like, the Wednesday lulls that you feel, you're like, oh, middle of the week, you're getting tired by then. A lot of that has to do with just oversaturation of carbon in your bloodstream from spending so much time in the office, right? Or in the recycled environment. So not having that is probably, and that's why, you come back Monday and you're like, oh, it hits you. You kind of start to acclimate. And by the end, you get the lulls again, and then you're acclimating by Thursday, Friday, having those carbon changes. And then you go out and you lose it again. And so
That's fascinating.
looking
I
at,
didn't I didn't realize that that was actually, I mean, it makes sense if you start like studying people and how the work environment affects them. I mean, tenants have started asking about air quality. And I think it's for a different reason. I mean, they're obviously asking for, how quickly does the air scrubber turn over air in here and purify
yeah.
it so that we don't have to worry about a larger number of people being in the same space and breathing in COVID from each other. But that's really interesting. I didn't realize. I mean, obviously, it's going to impact productivity with your employees.
Right. So that's part of it as well. So I think that those things have kind of been combined together for a lot of clients, and they're looking at them in that way. I think indoor air quality. I would say that artificial intelligence I mean, we've hit the nail on some systems in the built environment in order to deliver immense amounts of value. And that, as somebody who at Brainbox AI, our AI is basically sits on top of a existing BMS, right? And we have a
Which stands
short,
for
long,
Building Management System, correct?
yeah, building management
Okay.
system, which is oftentimes the really expensive technology that goes into your building after you've built the actual physical structure. It's what controls your air. It's what controls your alarms. It controls your lighting. It controls all the components of your building from a centralized location. And this BMS is functionally, the way buildings operate is it's like cruise control on a car. It's static and it's reactive, and it only changes when something has kind of gone out of the parameters that are established. And with AI, we can learn not only how the building operates, but also start to make predictions of what will happen with a very high level of accuracy. In our case, we're doing 99% accuracy up to 4 hours out. We can with such
Wow.
confidence say this is how your building's going to react to external temperature changes in the way that people move throughout your building. And so with that level of confidence, we can then adjust operations in order to deliver A, more comfort, which is important, right? But B, significantly reduce your energy consumption, right? It takes a lot of energy to constantly zigzag between cooling and heating a space. And that's kind of what air conditioning control systems do today. And it represents 40% of all energy consumption in the United States is commercial HVAC. And so if it's pinging back and forth, trying to keep itself in whatever set point we've established for it, that right there, that pinging is missed. It's discomfort, right? Because it's too hot, it's too cold, it's too hot, it's too cold. And it's also overrunning mechanical equipment. So as a building owner, that's an investment you've made. Every time you start and stop that equipment, it costs money and reduces the lifespan of that. You got to go get maintenance. And then and you have systems fighting against each other, right? One's heating, one's cooling. And so you're losing tons of energy. So our AI, because of that predictive component, as well as a series of short, long-term deep neural network learning mechanisms, we can actually optimize and reduce energy by anywhere from 15 to 30% in a built environment, just depending on what kind of level of infrastructure utilization you have. And I think that's fantastic, right? Because it's software, you just turn it on. It doesn't require really costly material. I don't have to come in and install something. I don't need to rip out a boiler room. There's all these really costly, heavy investments that you as a developer and property owner have made that we can optimize without necessarily changing hardware, right? So that's one of the things, like how can we we can improve operations of expensive hardware with cost-effective solutions in software.
That's fascinating. So let's walk through that. I mean, up to 99% accuracy 4 hours out. That's incredible. So I mean, as an example, it's 3 a.m. It knows that people are going to start coming in starting at 7. It's in the winter, so it starts slowly heating up the building until 7, so that it's the right temperature when people get back there because it was shut down overnight. Or how is that kind of how that would work?
So the way the systems work today, and if you're a building, every building has every kind of large building will have a facility manager, a building engineer, something like that, right? Probably quite a few of them are listening right now.
Yeah.
But these guys look at occupancy when your clients are coming in, when your tenants are showing up, and they make plans based off of how long it takes to cool or heat a space prior to it needing to be used, right? And so and what they do is they program, it's called programming. It's a sequence of operations into the BMS on like turn on the fan, run the cool air, do this, that, and the other. And what ends up happening is that becomes the kind of sequence of operations, and it stays that way, unless of course someone says we're going to start showing up later or we're going to show up. The difference is there are external factors that can drive your efficacy of your buildings or the cost centers of your building. So a lot of utilities have peak demand charges, and it all happens around the same time. Everyone shows up every day. It's because most people get to work around the same time, right? And so your peak demand charges are basically the time everyone gets there or the time every building turns on, right? So if you think about pre-COVID times, everybody went to the office, and we're in Nashville. Everyone fights through traffic. They all get into the buildings, and then thousands and thousands of people go into their offices. That has an impact on temperature. So buildings have to kick into high gear to cool off ahead of time. And every building doing that is a strain on the utility infrastructure. And so they have a huge spike in demand. And what they have to do to mitigate that is they charge people extra money, because then they have to go buy power from somewhere else, or they have a coal burning plant, right, that they use quick fire. And so AI learning this and understanding the changes or the charges that might be coming, you can say, you know what, maybe what I'll do is at 3 a.m., instead of waiting until 6 a.m. to start cooling like I've been programmed to do, I'll cool it even further down now when power's cheap, and then coast up through and not be charged for that peak demand. And that's the fiscal component, right?
Wow.
So AI can learn that, and it'll learn when people show up. It'll figure it out, right? Because systems are getting kicked on. It'll if you have occupancy data integrated, some do, some don't. It can fill in the gaps if they see thermal trends shifting that are extraneous to what the outside environment is doing. So there's a lot of intelligence baked into it. And it's just a lot of simple inferers, right? Like that's, AI is this real big scary thing for a lot of people. But really it's just a lot of system. It's the system's has been taught to infer information. If this, then this, right? It's Boolean logic, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like, these employers that are starting their work days at different hours. Either they come in at 10 a.m. after rush hour and they leave at 6 or 7 p.m. after rush hour to just avoid the inefficiencies that come with that. I mean, it just makes sense.
Yeah. That's it. That's a great example of and that's something else. Like, not everything requires a new fancy tech thing. Like, we don't always need new widgets and softwares and sensors to solve every problem, right? Like, a lot of things can be just fixed with like better administrative planning.
Simple rethinking.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And that's when we talk about innovation being from a top down, it's important that it's not just some team that's sitting there going all right, what new widget are we going to buy? But what are some processes that we can implement in the way that we operate that would benefit not only our employees, but the way that we operate? Let's stagger the teams that come in, right? Because there's value. I know everyone's saying the office workers is dead. It's just not true.
Not even close.
It's just, there's a lot of people who like office, particularly millennials, which is interesting. A lot of people would be surprised. Millennials are driving the return to work narrative because so many of them, that's their social network. That's where they go and socialize. It's where they meet people. The millennial generation, for a lot of parts, wants to go back to the office because most of them are high density urban dwellings. So they have small apartments in cities somewhere, and they have maybe a roommate, and they want to go back to the office. They want to get out. They want to go have space. They want to do it. They want to socialize and meet other people. A lot of them aren't married. Most of them don't own homes. And so the office isn't going anywhere. But figuring out how the office can be more impactful is probably really a good idea. So you can say, let's stagger our teams so that there's reduced risk of exposure, but let's make the teams cross-functional so that they can address any concern across their group. So I can go to someone in there'll be one person from marketing there. I'll go to there and talk to the marketing person. And then, but there's also, then we can have that face-to-face interaction that drives kind of spontaneous innovation, right? Because that's where it happens. The best ideas are always like, people just sitting around BS like this, right? And
Yep.
normally there's a beer in their hand, right? But like
Yeah,
that's where
that's
like
usually how we're having our discussions. I was thinking about that earlier. I was like, man, we're missing a couple of beers.
exactly. But like that goes back to like what's his name? Oh God, I forget his name. He was a Greek philosopher, and he was tasked with figuring out if a jeweler had stolen the gold that he was tasked to make a crown with. And he was told that he had to figure it out, like figure out how to know if they had stolen, right, or mixed in some less precious metal. And he was like, oh God, I can't think. I'm thinking about it. And finally, he just went to the bath and was just like hanging out. And the baths in those days were like a social environment. They sat down, they relaxed, they talked, they BS. And when that moment happened, he was outside the confines of directly working on that specific project, and he was out socializing. He noticed the water overflowed in the bath when a person got in, and that's when he had that what's called the eureka moment. That's where that term comes from. Eureka means
Test
I've
the
got it,
volume.
I've got it, right? And he ran through the streets naked, screaming, "I've got it, I've got it!" And he learned about density, but he was doing it just BSing with people, right, hanging out. And so it's not the cubicle's not the answer necessarily. Working isolated at home in a private office isn't necessarily the answer. I think the answer is just kind of whatever works best for anybody and enabling that.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's probably going to be a mixture of both, right? I
Yeah.
mean, my team is now far more remote friendly than we were before COVID. Now, I have a team that's 100% millennials. So when you were saying like millennials want to be back in the office, I was kind of laughing because June hit and I'd had the team working from home and they were all just like every day. I was like, can we come back to the office? We kind of want to come back. We don't really care.
Right.
We'll take the risk, whatever. I was like, ah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you guys are welcome to come. So, I mean, we've been working back in the office since, June. And I
Counterintuitive,
think
right?
it's, yeah,
You would think it'd be like the old stodgy guys are like, well, we got to get back in there. But it's young people want to go back to the office. It's crazy.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
nobody
it's
wants to
the
just sit at
opposite.
home on their computer all day. It's not, I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of boring.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's fun, but yeah, it's true. I mean, there's so much synergy that you get from just being able to walk down the hallway and say hey to the marketing guy and ask him a quick question, and there's a ton of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and so like that was the idea behind, and I don't want to throw like these guys under the bus, but like so I won't say the names, but that was the idea behind the open office, right? When the open office concept was born, the idea was like, let's get people out of their cubicles, let's start talking to each other, let's start being innovative. And whenever they did that, they started looking at the data, and they found that actually without that kind of private space, people's desire to go and interact dissipated, right? They wanted to try and create some little zone for themselves. So that's why you go to open office, everyone's got headphones and they don't talk as much. Um, but so they found that innovation, those like spontaneous interactions dropped, productivity dropped, right? But what they did discover was that they saved a butt ton of money on furniture and build outs. And so the open office kind of stayed. And so I think that's where a lot of people's concern about the death of the office space comes from, is like that we've historically seen that even drops in productivity, provided that the cost savings for that delta is acceptable financially, like they'll do it, right? They'll put everybody remote. And we're seeing organizations do that right now. They're saying everyone's going remote, but then we also see a lot of organizations saying, you know what? We're doing hybrid. You want to come in? Come in. You want to go out? Go out. And what's likely to happen is slowly people are going to start coming to the office, the millennials that need or want to be there and have less fear of COVID. And then as more people become vaccinated, people are going to be starved for social interaction, and more people are going to come back to the office. And I think what's going to end up happening is ownership's going to have to be a little bit more is going to have to become a little bit more flexible, because the right now the tenants have kind of all the cards on how much space they want, and so they're going to have find ways to use up what may inevitably become empty space, or better enable their existing space for other customers, right? So I think there's a right now's the time. It's a rethink for a lot of business owners and people or property owners. They need to think about how they can enable this really hybridized version of the workplace and prioritize productivity and innovation in the times that people are there. So I think that's why it's so important that property developers look to enable their spaces so much more, because that's going to be the competitive edge that they have against somebody who's just got four walls and a roof. I've got
Yep.
four walls and a roof. sitting in it right now, but I'd much rather be in an office that was better attuned to, me and you figuring out and coming up with new ideas and creating something new and exciting.
Yeah, I mean, how do you differentiate yourself as a property owner, right? I mean, there's how many hundreds of 1980s office buildings that haven't been renovated out there, but if you can legitimately say as a property owner, hey, we've got an upgraded HVAC system that turns the air over 3 times faster than your typical HVAC, and that actually increases your employee productivity by 2.5% or whatever. I mean, that's actually a tangible number that these employers can start running the numbers on to see, okay, well, there's actually a bottom line difference that this building makes to us instead of just being a place to house our employees.
Absolutely. And that's something I think more property owners should start to try to have that conversation with their customers, right? Like how this is a way that it becomes important. It's like, how can we further enable your goals as an organization? How can, you're renting from us, but this is a space where you create and you develop and you design and you do all of this, right? All this spark and innovation, all this work. And you also fill out spreadsheets, of course, right? But what can we do together? What data can we gather in order to make this more productive for you, more beneficial, right? And as a building owner, you need to be able to say yes to a lot more stuff. And you're having tenants ask for more stuff, right? You're having tenants that want to have access to the BMS because they, just like us, are trying to get money from Blackstone, and they want to be able to. They want to show their ESG report, and they need to be able to show that they're reducing energy consumption. And so, while it may be your building and your BMS, they're using the energy, and it's on their sustainability report. And so, they need to be able to have that access. And if you haven't enabled that, they might not be that happy or that interested in staying there, right? Because fundamentally, having a good ESG rating is going to become much more important than just where you stay. And if your building doesn't enable that, you're going to be in a little bit of trouble. I had a client that I worked with who had a large institutional renter, one of the big, professional services firms. They had 75% of their building. It was a high rise in downtown Toronto. That is some expensive property. And they just vacated the whole thing. And because they couldn't get what they needed from a data standpoint in order to, better understand their ESG requirements, but also how their employees worked, right? They're a data-driven company. They want to know how their workers use their spaces and how to they want to really fine-tune understanding of how coworkers work together. They wanted to be able to identify what they called, oh God, this was a brilliant idea. They wanted to identify what they called unofficial solutions, like specialists or something like that. So basically, like, if you ever work in an office and you're supposed to go talk to marketing, but that if you go to so and so over in accounting, like, she knows everything and she knows how to get this stuff done and fix it for you, every office, every building has that person or those people. And so they were trying to figure out how to identify these people who are becoming resources to their teams, even though they weren't designed to be them, not only, but to help lighten their load, but also to replicate what they're doing that makes them so successful for their team members to work with. Right. And so, but the building didn't have any of the abilities to do that, didn't have 5-grain occupancy, didn't have an integration with the BMS, didn't have any energy management, no metering, blah, 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 blah. And so they left. They went and built their own one. Right. And so this big REIT has a 75% of a high rise in one of the most expensive cities in the country empty.
So that raises a great point. What could that landlord have done that you feel would have retained that tenant?
I think not waiting to be asked. I think talking to their tenants ahead of time, asking them, would these things be valuable to you? Would you be interested in knowing these things? And then taking the step and not fighting the Excel sheet battle, like having somebody in that. I mean, I think that it's fundamentally a leadership thing is the issue. But I think that hypothetically, if they had leadership who wanted to embrace that, I think it's a matter of having a conversation with their team. I think it's a matter of having a conversation with their customers. I think it's a matter of creating the capability to make those upgrades internally by working with designers and architects and technology specialists and implementers and system integrators, and creating kind of a cross-functional group that tries to address needs for all the different people, right? You need to create like a a Knights of the Round Table, right? It's you've got facility management, you've got finance, you've got HR, you've got your tenants, you've got your vendors, your system integrators, your service providers, you got everybody. And you sit at the table and go, okay, like what are the things what's the dream? What can we do with an existing built building in order to deliver the needs for all of us, right? And where is there cross functionality? Is there an asset that I use that you can use? And then he can also use the data and she can take this out of it. Well, that's one, we can achieve that with this one thing. That's delivering exponential value. But the way it works today is one person says, hey, I want this thing. They go, well, that thing's too expensive. But the reality is it's not going to just be used by facilities or just be used by the occupant. It's going to be used. You can find a way to identify technologies and solutions that address multiple different use cases and different personas within the organization. And so you have to have that group together, or that organization together in the first place. That being said, I think organizations should start putting pressure on their CTOs to actually be forward-thinking tech guys, right? Like,
that's what they're there for, right?
There's plenty of 75-year-old CTOs out there, right? For some reason. And we live in a world where every 5 years, like our technology is completely uprooted and changed, right? Like we have someone who hasn't been in the field in 40 running flagship on these major corporations. Like there's some concern there, right? Like I'll walk into meetings sometimes and we'll like talk to the CTO or the person who's supposed to make the decision around this stuff. And it's like, they're just so in the past, right? Or they're not. So I think organizations should start, I don't know, giving younger people a chance to to do this, hire someone in their 40s, at least hire someone in their 30s,
right? I mean, they'll probably have a little bit of a better idea of what technology is out there.
And they're cheaper. I'm sure
way cheaper. Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we talked about last week that I'd love to dive into a little bit deeper because we just didn't have time were some case studies. I know that there's going to be some specific information that you can't share just based on what kind of projects they are and who the clients are. But could you walk us through just some high level, like, hey, here, this developer had this idea and here's where innovation and technology and proptech and this and that kind of impacted and changed the development?
Certainly. So the first one that kind of comes to mind, I think it's probably the one you want to talk about, was a kind of a smart city development. So there was a developer out west who wanted to create kind of a world-class, high-end residential community with commercial and governmental spaces. They basically created like a micro city in a single development. It was like 33,000 plus acres, 20-year build-out cycle time, multiple phases. And the vision there was to create a fully technology integrated community, right? And so, there was a lot of things that we did. So on that project, I wasn't lead on that one, but in that project, one of the things we did is we sat down as an organization, sat down with the developer and did kind of a co-creation session. We said, like, what do you want, right? And that conversation isn't always as smooth. It's not as like complimentary. I think it's one of the things that's important is that we challenge why you want stuff. That's kind of one of the things that I like to do when I'm working with people. Like, again, you don't always need a piece of tech to solve everything. Sometimes you can solve stuff very simply, right? And so when a customer says, hey, I want to do this, and we go, well, why? Why do you want to do that, right? What's the root reason behind it? And then more specifically, what's the root cause? So we did something like that. We did like a co-creation session. And away from that, we came with, I want to have my own network. I want to have my own, we want to create our own network. We don't want to be subservient to a third-party vendor because we're not happy with any of them. We want to have buildings
and this is internet, or this is
fiber optic internet. We want our clients to have the fastest internet. We don't want to be subservient to somebody else. A privately owned fiber network.
Wow.
Yeah.
So do they kind of treat it as a utility for the smart city?
Yeah, they created their own utility. Yeah, it was a private fiber network for the entire micro city.
Wow.
And then leveraging that fiber network, that major backbone, implemented smart lighting to manage traffic, right? And warn people when there's road hazards or when there needs to, a street's closed for construction. So you drive onto that lot, and all of a sudden you'll see all the lights are red ahead of you on the street lights. You'll know that that road's closed and you need to go some other way, right? Or it'll show you where there's parking spots available on the street. So as you go up, one light will change depending on if it's parked or not. So you can look down a single road and identify if there's where there's parking spots available, even at night. So that was one. That's the smart, street lighting. We did fully Alexa integrated homes. So your blinds, your lights, your air conditioning, your audio, your AV, everything's voice command, and we integrated with Amazon on that one. And then it also allows you to remotely access them. So you can say, hey, I forgot to turn off the lights. Alexa, from my phone, turn off home lights, and boop, your lights will turn off at home. We did a weather integration with every house's water landscaping infrastructure. So all the ground. This is out west where there's a desert. There's a lot of deserts, and water is a very valuable commodity out there. And so we integrated their watering, sprinkler system with weather data, so we could identify, and there was some moisture meters inside that are baked in. So whenever the water went to a certain level, it said, all right, we need to water. But before it did that, it would go back and say, is it going to rain today? Right? If there was a really good chance of rain, it would delay the actual watering and wait for the rain to come through, and then check again the moisture meter. And if it was wet enough, it would. And if it wasn't quite wet enough, it would kind of top it off. And so it's using natural resources to achieve the goals that it's trying to do in a scarce environment. So those are just a couple examples of things that we had done. But it was a fantastic project. It was beautiful too.
Yeah, the irony is never wasted on me whenever I drive past a neighbor's yard and they've got the sprinkler going off while it's raining outside. Yeah. It's just like, what? How is this? What is happening here? It's pretty funny to like look back on, 20 something years ago, Disney released that movie Smart House, and now we literally have smart like neighborhoods and cities. It's crazy.
That's the one thing that it drives me insane. Most people have a Nest, an Echo, an Amazon, Alexa in their home. Our homes are smarter than our buildings, right? That's
true.
We can do it. We have the technology, right? Consumers are expecting it. That's the other thing is when you think about your baseline experience, you go home, I sit in my house and I go hey, TV, top volume up, blah, 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 play Taylor Swift, right? So me and my kids can dance to it.
Yeah, the kids.
Yeah. Sure. All right. Bad Reputation was fantastic.
That's right.
Take that. And so so why can't I just do that at my office? Why is it so difficult, right? And that's the thing. I think that's what we try to address. We try to solve, make that process simple for people who that want to do it, people that are on the fence about doing it. We can help them deliver that. And the beautiful thing about it is if you're doing a new construction, it's actually cheaper to make a smart city or a smart building than it is to do the traditional way, because there's immense amounts of waste and inefficiency in the traditional construction model. And so by doing it this way, you're going to do it faster, you're going to do it cheaper, and then you're going to have a building that's enabled to address any of your needs, right? And I think that gets to something that you and I had talked about. Your tenant today is not necessarily your tenant in 10 years. I don't know if the 30-year lease is going to survive this, right? I think that people, because we've lost so many businesses, when things go back to normal, we're going to see huge influx of startups again, trying to fill the void of a lot of these businesses that have disappeared. And startups don't necessarily have the wherewithal or the credit rating or anything to sign a 30-year lease. So I think, we're going to see some 3-year, 1-year, 5-year leases. And that means as a building owner, you need to be prepared for potentially changing out your clients every couple years with new TIs. And so in order to be competitive, how can you have the right infrastructure to address multiple different clients' needs and fundamentally enable them as well, right? So we've talked about the importance of the built environment enabling your tenants to deliver their goals. how do you design, how do you think about that when you might have a different type of tenant every 5 years, right? Like, so that's where the new construction world, where we come in and we say we're going to help do that design assist from concept all the way through to delivery to ensure the fidelity of that capability, but also ensure that it's done in a cost effective way, and so that you're prepared for the future.
Yeah, so I definitely want to get into the costs here in a second because obviously it's, for investors, it's all about the return on investment. If I'm going to spend $100,000 to make a smart building, how's that going to come back to me? But one thing I want to talk about first is, I think this kind of goes in line with one, the entire smart city that you were a part of, but also these new construction commercial buildings. I mean, it's not cheap to go through and make a building smart if you're doing it right, and if you're taking it all the way. I mean, you can do little things here and there that of course help, but if you're going to go have a fully integrated smart building, you're spending some money. How do you pre-plan that building for technology of the future, right? Because if technology is changing over every 5 years, in 10 years, my building's going to be obsolete again. So how do I make sure to stay ahead of that?
So I think the first step to do is to plan core infrastructure. So if you look at your building, there is layers of how often things change, right? Like what we call edge devices, which is, your phone, your sensors, those things change yearly, daily, monthly, right? Those things are constantly being updated, but they're relatively easy to change if they're in space, right? It's like, you pull off the sensor, you put on a new sensor, right? They don't require a huge amount of cost. Now, you have your series of like intermediate technologies, and like maybe I'll just see if I have this up here. So if you think about like the lifespan, right? So you have the longest layer, the thing that sticks around the longest is your core infrastructure, right? Like that's water, that's sewers, that's gas, electrical grid, street lighting, communication, fiber optics. Like that stuff is there the longest, right? And fundamentally, like we're not changing too much at that level. But what's important is to plan your infrastructure layer to be flexible. That's the first step. So how do you plan for your infrastructure layer to be flexible? The next is your system layer. This is like intermediate life. This is like, traffic lights, meters, BMSs, like fire life, all the like kind of stuff that you interact with on a day in and day out basis that leverages that core infrastructure. That stuff tends to have a 30-year life cycle, 20-year life cycle. They're not, we're not innovating too much in traffic management. Well, we are with autonomous vehicles, but from like a controlling standpoint, not too much is there. The next layer is your analytics layer, right? So we've left the systems. We're now in the cloud, and in the cloud, that's part of that's what your data lake strategy is as an organization. That's always moving, I think. But that's what your CTO's job is to do at an organization. So how are you capturing, how are you managing, and how are you actionalizing that data? That's part of that larger conversation we had. And then there's the edge devices. Those things shift out, right? And they're always changing, and that's okay. It just is what it is. But with that being the case, you need to be much more conscious of what you do invest in at the edge level, right? So I had a property developer talk about how a great example is like he replaced all of his outlets to start to include USB in all of his properties. And he's like, and then that kind of went away, right? Like, because people didn't want to use like 12 volt for all of their USBs. They wanted to maybe use a higher amperage or something like that. So that's an edge device, short life cycle product. Yep. Does that kind of answer your question? So I think the planning starts at the infrastructure and system layer. And if you don't plan for those to intercommunicate, but also be flexible, you're not going to be able to address those next two layers that are always shifting and always moving.
Right. Are you seeing changes in the way that buildings are designed physically in order to accommodate technology or future adaptations?
Well,
because we had talked, we talked a little bit about, one thing like, maybe an office building is going to be good for an office for 10 years. And then, in year 11, it's probably better suited for multifamily. And so like, let's go through and shift those back to multifamily. And then 10 years after that, maybe you shift it back. Are you starting to see that a little bit more now?
So I
Like
think that
pre-planning for that?
flexible spaces, I think, yeah. I mean, we definitely are, right? We're seeing more people are designing their buildings to be more flexible for the long term, right? And this necessarily wasn't even COVID. This was other stuff. But a great example, and I talked about it with you. There was I went into a site walk here in Nashville for a active senior living center, which is basically, there's I'm not in the elderly care environment too often, but it's basically like you've got like planned senior communities, then you've got active communities, which doesn't require any help, but they want to be a little more centralized. It's not like a big house; they have an apartment. They're kind of scaling down. Then you start getting into supported care where there's like maybe food and things like that, and then you get all the way down to like really really
Nursing and memory care.
nursing homes and like really
Yep.
intense stuff. And so what these guys were, they were really on that earlier stage. And so they had designed this building to be a place like it had pools, and gyms, and also stuff. It was like a cool complex, but particularly for retirees. And they would they had a movie theater, and they had like all these different really cool things. And when we went and did the site walk, what was really interesting is a couple of those areas, like the movie theater, and then one other area, like had a cocktail bar, like a bar lounge area that they built at. Both those areas were piped and plumbed and vented in order to be converted into a laundromat, like a much more intense laundry area, and a in-house kitchen. So if you like ripped up the floor, the carpet on the ground in the theater, there's primary drainage, right? There's fire suppression systems above it that are commercial grade. They've got hood vents, all the infrastructure for hood vents to pull air out and cycle it so that they can run a kitchen. And the reasoning for that is their customers are going to get old. They're going to get older, and they're going to have to, the idea is that they eventually are going to potentially, as their clients age, they can convert to the needs that their clients are going to require that, right? Brilliant, right? And it adds resale value.
Yeah, I mean, you save so much money doing that.
Right now, you'd have to build a whole nother building and then ship it. And like, there's just so much other stuff you'd have to do. And now they laid the duct work. That's all they did.
Yeah. I mean, and it's brilliant. If you're an office developer, to think about it, like you come in, you develop an office building, but you prepare that office building could be converted into multifamily, and you go ahead and spend that upfront cost. It costs you a little bit more, but what does that do for your resale value and your prospective buyers, 10, 15 years from then? Like, hey, look, you don't like office, this office is a little aged, now you can come in and convert it into multifamily or turn it into a hotel, or, it just opens up the buyer pool.
It changes your TI, it changes your tenant infill requirement. Like, that's the other thing is like, it speeds that process. So if it's like, oh, well, we're buying this and we're going to convert it to that, right? We're going to keep the shell, but we're going to have to tear everything down. It's like, well, that process is faster now. It's less expensive, but it also addresses the constant shifts in the market, right? Housing is like residential housing is going gangbusters right now, right? Like people are fleeing the big kind of urban cores on the coast and moving back home because they can work remotely. And so you're seeing kind of central cities property values just skyrocket. Like I've got a house in the market that I bought that's, it's got like 300 grand worth more value from 6 years ago, right? And it's in a kind of a city that had stagnated. So here in Nashville, all the residential market's still moving really fast, and it's in response to COVID, it's in response to these changes. And so as a property owner, if you've got there's guys that have they built giant buildings downtown on spec for office. And most offices are kind of empty right now. So if I was them, I'm going, oh man, what am I going to do? How do I capitalize on the market trends now? If they had actually designed with the capability to convert to high-end homes or condos or whatever the case may be, they could have spent the last 6 months doing that and then turning around and renting those properties. Right? They could be renting, right? They could have customers in them right now if they had done that. So it gives you, not only does it give you resale value, right? But it gives you the ability to address whatever whatever market generates the most revenue at that time.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of hedging your bet because these towers can sometimes take years to build. And so, you have no idea how the market's going to shift. You might be building the next giant multifamily tower, and then you have what happens in Nashville in 2017, a dozen apartment complexes, hundreds and hundreds of units get delivered, and all of a sudden
Yeah.
the market's incredibly soft. I mean, it
Yeah.
took a little bit to catch up.
Yeah. And so it gives you the ability to be flexible, right? Like that's, I mean, at the end of the day, that's what resiliency really is, right? Like resiliency in business is about being able to address, being prepared to address problems that are external, right? Being able to address, there's also internal components, but like, a flood, right? We live in, like I said, we're here in Nashville. We had a suicide bomber on Christmas Day this year, right? Like, how do AT&T, I have AT&T internet. It went out for a couple of days, but they had while they addressed the problem there, they reshifted networks to other areas. My internet was slower, but I got it back in a couple of days. That's incredible, right? Like that's a that's a resiliency plan. And that's important, and maybe it's not a suicide bomber, maybe it's a tornado, maybe it's, a pandemic that makes everyone stay home for days. And so now homes are more valuable. There's just so many different things that can negatively impact your business. And it feels like there's more and more now, right? Due to global warming and these kind of changes. So it's more important. I don't think this is our last pandemic in our lifetime. To be honest, I don't think, and I don't think we're going to see less kind of chaos. We're seeing fires in California that are impacting indoor air quality, threatening homes. There's all sorts of stuff that is just kind of accelerating due to this. And so it's important that you plan to be flexible because you're going to have to be.
Yeah. I mean, the more that you can, again, you're hedging your bet, right? And so just taking the chance, yeah, look, maybe it costs you a little bit more to just run, another vent where you can run pipes and stuff later. But
Yeah.
I mean, how much is that going to save you in the long run?
Yeah. And a lot of that can be fixed by tenant infill too. Like what if you just did this infrastructure layer? Like, don't even worry about the system components. Just do the infrastructure. Make sure maybe run an extra set of piping to every couple hundred feet on your third floor that you can turn to plumbing. You can turn it to shower, water, or put an access grate on them. Cover it with carpet. No one will ever know it's there. And then in 5-6 years, when all of a sudden everybody wants to live in a high-end condo downtown or whatever, boom, tenant info, right? So
yeah,
just enabling yourself to be able to deliver something else.
Yeah, I mean, all it takes is adding a chase. You add a chase here and there. I mean, that literally is probably an improvement upon, what most people do right now. I mean, because think about it. That's the most expensive is having to go through and cut up these floors and add stuff back in and go back. Because if you think about it on the front end, you're going to engineer the building around it. Whereas if you're coming at it on the back end, you've got to engineer around the building. And that's a nightmare to deal with.
I mean, and to engineer on the building, you've got to, let's say you got the new plan. Fantastic, right? You want to ensure that you're delivering the same service to your other customers that are in the building, right? Unless you're doing you're kicking everybody out. But then there's like structural components that you're potentially unlevering, right? Like you're tearing up concrete, you're going into walls, there's potentially, the conduit isn't wide enough for the new system. I mean, there's just all sorts of stuff. Like a lot of times what we tell architects, and we have architects that do this, is when they're designing a building, and you're building that kind of core infrastructure where you're going to run your cabling and all your wire and all that stuff, like put 2 in there.
just add one.
Add one, right? Add one. It doesn't cost a lot, doesn't take up much space, but then whenever some new invention comes along, you've got a fully committed empty conduit that you can just throw in there. That's not a huge tech solution. That's not a new app. It's just putting in some duplication so that as new things come along, you can address it, right? Like right now, I can't do that because I've got conduits stuffed to the gills with every single piece of technology in that building, and I can't go in there and rip all that out and put in a new one. I'm going to shut the power off. I'm going to shut off, air. I'm going to shut off, internet connection for your company. Like it's just not feasible. So that's the thing. Is it's just not feasible because it wasn't designed to be flexible.
Yep. So let's dive into the fun part now. I mean, how do we make it financially feasible? How because I would argue that every developer would, of course, offer all of these things on every single building that they do because, one, tenants find them attractive. Tenants are willing to pay more for them. typically, and maybe that's how we can try and justify it. But how do developers kind of get an ROI on their
Yeah,
expenses involved in making smart buildings?
absolutely. So, it's actually really easy. It is cheaper to design a smart building than it is to design a kind of a traditional building. And I'll kind of explain how that works. So right now, the traditional model, you have a developer working with an architect, they have a beautiful vision, a design. It then goes, they bring in the GC. The GC, is like, this is great, this is really cool, we're excited to be part of this project. And then it goes into pre-construction planning. And what they end up doing is they take the product vision and then the plans, the architectural plans, and then they start to break out into different components, right? Mechanical, electrical, plumbing. Those may even go, electrical might be broken into low voltage, high voltage. It may even go secure, it may even break down further. And what happens is each time you're doing landscaping, they're creating silos of communication and silos of deliverables. And so those organizations then say, all right, we have our electrical plan. We're going to take our electrical plan and then we're going to sub out to a different electrical contractor and they're going to quote materials. We've built a spec and we're going to go out and we're going to get bids for the material. And so what ends that happens is you have an electrical contractor that goes to an electrical distributor, right? And this is happening in the mechanical, this is happening in plumbing, this is the same channel. And they're all kind of spreading out further and further to each other. And they go to a distributor and that distributor goes, great, let's look at these plans, these products. Yep, I carry all these items. Hey, I don't carry this item. That goes to another house across the street, but you and me have a special pricing agreement because you buy all your conduit from me. And if you want to be able to sell this whole package, you need to buy this thing instead of this. So then he goes back and makes a request to switch some item out so that he can get that preferred pricing package from that distributor. The distributor is simultaneously working with a manufacturer's rep and a manufacturer who are saying, well, you know what? If you could use this item, which is 10 years old, it's going to be, I'll cut the price in half, right? And get rid of it. And so they're all trying to shave little pieces off of the cost in order to generate more margin. And so you end up with this horribly margin stacked product, right? The manufacturer sells margin to the rep to the distributor to the contractor to the GC to the customer, right? And so those are layers of commission that everyone's got to put on top of it. But you're also finding ways to create more margin. And there's a little dirty secret about sales reps. They make a thing called overage. And so if anytime over the sales price, they get more money. And so they're going to do what they call spec lock to get that. And so by doing that, there's a ton of money baked in there. But more importantly, that's happening across your entire technology stack. So that's happening in plumbing, that's happening in mechanical components. And then simultaneously from a labor standpoint, they're all running conduit, they're all running wire, they're all pulling things, right? And functionally, that doesn't need to happen. You'll have 6, 7, 8 layers of conduit and wire run across all those things, which could really just be 1 or 2, right? And so if you take that concept with the developer and we sit down and we design the technology requirements to fit that intention and then work through the channel to ensure that fidelity of vision as a partner with the developer, we're able to say, you know what, you can't switch that spec out. It has to be this. And I don't care if it's going to save you $2 a light bulb or a nickel on this, because that's not what's important. The long-term value is the asset, right? The channel is transactional. And so the channel is focused on getting the lowest price right now to sell for the highest margin, right, that they can make or justify. And for the contractor, they're trying to reduce the cost as much as possible. So you have this constant battle where these guys are trying to sell for more money, and they're driving an older product that costs much less, that fits the lower cost that the contractor needs, but doesn't actually work for the customer. So let's say we do all that, right? We go through the traditional channel. Now you have this vision for a connected building that works together, or a tenant does. And all those systems in there, none of them were designed to work together, right? Some of them don't even speak a proprietary integration protocol. Some of them do, but they speak BACnet. One speaks Modbus. One speaks LawnWorks. One speaks a proprietary language from the manufacturer that they won't integrate with anyone else. One uses APIs. So now you have to hire a system integrator to come in and smash and figure out ways to kind of make all this work together. Doesn't work the way it's intended, but eventually it does. But you got to pay that guy. a lot of money. And so you can mitigate all of that by just saying, we want to design a smart building up front. Let's bring in a technology design partner to come in and help with us. And they're going to sit down and walk through and ensure this gets delivered in the way we want it to be delivered. And we've done that for our clients. We did a project here in Nashville called the Timber Project when I was at Siemens. And we cut first run costs. We said, they didn't necessarily believe us. We said, all right, you bid it out the normal way. We'll build it out our way. And we'll do the whole package. We'll do the whole package. We'll bid all of it, right? And instead of just bidding on mechanical, right? We want to bid on everything. We did it that way. We were 5% lower just off bat for the whole package. I mean, you're cutting 5% off of an entire first run cost for a building.
I mean, when you're talking, especially on a project that size, it's hundreds of millions. I mean, 5% is a huge difference.
Yeah, it's monstrous, right? It's monstrous. So, and we cut 60 days off of construction time because we didn't have to hire a guy to come wire. We didn't have to hire a guy to come run wire for mechanical, a guy to run wire and conduit for for electrical, a guy to run it for plumbing. We didn't do it. We had one single utility fiber, that addressed all those needs. So we took all the different systems that were designed, we put them on one network, and we cut material costs, construction time, right? And that's where you save a ton of money. And now they had 60 days. They got 60 days of construction time cut down. The beauty of that is they ended up hitting when they started digging, they hit like a huge limestone deposit, right? Which took 60 days extra. So now everyone would have been behind schedule. But because we were able to truncate it on our side, they ended up finished on schedule and under budget.
So is that some sort of proprietary Siemens system, or is that something that any contractor can do? They just choose not to do? Like having people come in and run a single conduit line.
No, I mean, so I think anybody can do it, but the thing is, it's the know-how, right? Like you have to have the expertise, you have to understand the different systems that are going in, and that goes back to that siloization. A contractor isn't necessarily, your regular contractor is not necessarily going to have time to think about. Sorry, my niece is trying to FaceTime.
It's all good.
They're not necessarily going to think outside the focus of what they're worrying about, right? If I'm an electrical contractor, my job is to get on the job and off the job, and I don't drive scope, I don't drive decisions, I don't drive what the deliverable looks like. That's somebody else above me, and my job is to do the work, right? But at the same time, maybe some of those systems that I'm looking at are going to be addressing plumbing, right? Or mechanical, which isn't really what my focus is. I'm an electrical guy, right? So that's the problem, is the siloization. That's why it's valuable to have somebody. That's why the value is being able to navigate all those different trades and kind of ensure that what gets the vision and the goals of that development get done and implemented right the first time. But yeah, people can do it. They just need to take the time to learn or think about it and work on it and design it.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like it's anything that's really all too out there or so overly complicated that it's rocket science. It's like one of those things like, yeah, I mean, maybe we should have our employees come in 1 hour later. Let's see how that works for us. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's also understanding like the pitfalls of doing it wrong, or understanding the importance of like understanding the complicated nature of the channel and how to navigate that. Like that takes a long time, right? There's a lot of conflicting interests that happen in the channel of construction, from the contractor to the GC to the distributor to the manufacturers. Like everybody has their own kind of thing that they're trying to achieve. And so it's valuable to have somebody who understands how to navigate that in a way that ensures everyone kind of gets what they need, while simultaneously saving costs and improving timetables,
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that improving timetables alone is worth it. I mean, because that insurance and your carry costs will add up, man. They really do. So, David, prediction for 2021. What do you think is going to be one of the bigger? What do you think is going to have a bigger impact on technology and innovation this year in the built environment? I mean, obviously, we saw that Zoom and these remote work capabilities were massive for 2020. What do you think is going to happen in 2021?
I think people are going to be dying to go back, right? I think we're all gonna want to go back. I think what's going to end up happening is people are going to come back, and building tenants are going to say, you know what, we want something else. We want a better space, right? We want it to be cheaper. We want it to be more enabled. We want it to be more green. We want it to be more sustainable. We want it to be all of that, right? I think that tenants are going to drive that in a lot of ways because they, they're trying to appease their workers, and it's important because they have to figure out a way to get their workers to come back. Because at the end of the day, workers who workers are fundamentally more productive when they work and they're in a space together and they're able to work on stuff. Um, so I think that there's going to be a lot of new tenant infills that are going to drive. They're going to have to be a lot more capable than they probably planned them on them being. Right? So,
Yeah.
I think that we're going to see. I think we're going to see a lot more flex spaces go up. I think we're going to start seeing more edge development, like less urban core. We're going to start seeing kind of like mixed use flex spaces kind of on the periphery of cities, so kind of just outside the main areas. I think that's going to be valuable because people who have the wherewithal to buy a home are going to start doing that. They're going to try to work from home in a lot of cases, and but they're still going to want to be able to go get something to eat, go have a drink somewhere, but they're going to want to have it in an environment that's still COVID safe. So I think outdoor, edge, flex spaces. It's not quite one answer, but that's just like the image that keeps popping into my head. Is like a place to go sit down outside, socially distance, have a drink, listen to music, maybe let my kids play. That's close to my house that I don't have to like fight traffic and go downtown and pay for parking for.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically neighborhood retail at the core, right? I mean, that's neighborhood retail. You've got professional services offices, you've got restaurants, you've got bars, all of the services that provide your daily needs. And that's been a fascinating thing to watch throughout COVID because everybody's saying, oh, stay away from retail. Retail's dead. Retail's real. Amazon's coming in with the hammer. And it's just not even remotely true. Even with the shutdowns, I mean, there's some restaurants that are breaking records in sales but it's all because they're still serving their local neighborhoods. So I think you're absolutely right with that one.
And I think they're still doing. I mean, your local restaurants are delivering like never before. I mean, like a lot of places didn't deliver before COVID. Now every single restaurant open does, right? And that's why they're breaking records. Like maybe they're not addressing as many people inside, but they're just addressing more. Like they're not limited by the constraints of tabletops anymore. Right? They're limited by the constraints of how many things they can turn out based off of orders. And so that's an example of like technology, COVID driving innovation, and then leveraging technology to end up delivering their service to their core customers. Right? So like, how does that building, when you look at that building, like maybe what that building needs to be is less focused on, seating and focus more on more parking for Postmates drivers or more staging area for takeout orders or more area focused on, maybe more cooking or preparation times, right? So maybe convert more of it into more kitchen and hire more cooks. So there's like, there's a lot of things that that need to be addressed that they can do to address the new normal that's ahead of them. But neighborhood retail is the way to go. Like I personally, I think there's a lot of people are, I order from Amazon. I don't like to, but I do. It's inescapable, right? We're talking on the internet on a site that's probably hosted at Amazon headquarters. So the citizen Amazon is is becoming a truism, but that I spend time at home already. Right? Like I don't necessarily want to go out and I don't want to cook as much, right? Like I'm cooking, when COVID first hit, I'm cooking 3 meals a day in my home, right? I used to eat lunch out for work. I do that less and less. And I think that in 2021, as more people vaccinate, you're going to see people wanting to go out a lot more, but they're also not going to want to go put themselves completely at risk. So I think that you're going to see people who want to walk to a normal local restaurant, go check out a new outdoor venue, kind of safe area, like outdoor. And we're fortunate because we live in a place where even when the weather's bad, it's still manageable, right?
Right.
It's not like we live in like, Chicago where you're snowed in all the time. So outdoor dining and outdoor experiences are really viable here.
Yeah. Yeah. Nashville is very lucky in that respect, which is always nice. So it can be a little hot in the summers and it can definitely get pretty damn cold in the winters, but it's nowhere, it's not an extreme by any means. Well, David, if,
Example of that, like they say, it's not too cold. You're just not dressed enough, right? And
that's
I take
right,
that to heart.
you're just not dressed appropriately.
Get a bigger jacket.
Yeah. That's, I've got a buddy who says pretty much the same thing. It's like, there's no such thing as bad weather. You're just not dressed right.
I
I'm like,
agree.
that's actually a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, that's hot because I cannot handle the heat. It's just
I'm not built for that either. Don't
no,
worry.
I'm not. I know. I lived in New Orleans for 15 years, and I always carried this around as that. I turned into like an old stereotype. I do declare, I believe I've got.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you're like old Beauregard over there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, David, if anybody has any questions about Brainbox AI and how they can implement that in their building system, if they have questions about project management on some new developments or anything else, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah. So my email, my email for Brainbox is d.stoller@brainboxai.com. Or my personal email for the project management component. We're using personal right now, but stay tuned because it looks like we might be starting something up in the works in the next coming weeks and months. But you can reach out to me at david.f as in Foxtrot, Stoller, Stoller @gmail.com. Or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to take a message and set up a call to talk through what you're thinking about.
Yeah, that's probably the best. And on LinkedIn, you're just David Stoller, right?
Yep, just David Stoller. So look for the handsome guy in a black and white photo of my wife.
He is humble. He is also very humble. Well, David, I appreciate you joining me, man. I owe you some beers. Can't wait to catch up at East Nashville Beer Works. And thanks for coming on the show.
This week or next week.
That's it, man. All right. Take care, you guys.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate the opportunity, guys.